I'll do that. For sure. Hello everybody, and welcome to Hoe Street and to the launch of Matzine number 13, Johar. As Mayfield House and I, the editors for this issue, are going to speak very quickly about this and what we do generally. And then we will pass over to Owen Pritchard, who will introduce and chair the debate of the evening, which is to jargon and not to jargon. So I won't say too much about that in the meantime. Firstly, Matzine is something we began in our final year of architecture. We're all architecture graduates, some of us are actually architects. And we did it as an experiment in very rapid, very simple publishing. To publish even to our own group, but also to other groups within the year who were doing different things. And our 6 editors, as Mayfield has Ian, Ryan McLaughlin, put your hand up, Sean McAllister, Stephen Mackey, and Ryan McKinnon Pride, who's not here. So we rotate the editorship, or at least we have done, between the 6 of us. And we, for the last 3, have paired it up, and we've done a sort of collaborative thing. And that's generally the approach, is to say, well, in a very modest way, how can we connect or do things together in a published form. So, Matzine 13 was on the theme of jargon.
Yeah. Which I won't say too much about because I have a feeling that's probably going to be talked about. But it was, I think, straight away something that Ian and I got very excited about, to the point where we almost forgot to tell people. A lot of conversations talking about jargon. Pros and cons. That was fun. But we sort of, what we've been trying to do a bit more is, I suppose, is it started off as being completely an open call for submissions, and then as we've got more and we've realised, taking a strong sort of editorial role, that there were always people that we wanted to be part of issues. And so with this one in particular, we kind of always had people in mind that we asked, and thankfully people like Daisy and Crystal were contributed, but still, there was still, even though we asked them, there's still kind of the joy in the unpredictability of what came with that, and of course with kind of what everyone else brings to it, who we don't know until things kind of arrive often. And as always, it's like just a really nice mix. There is a serious side to it, and I suppose it started off quite serious, which we're always worried about. But I'm glad to see it's getting a more playful, joyful side to it, and I think working with Nuvu and graphic designers who designed the cover in response to the theme as well, helped kind of make
I mean, we should say too that from something that begun just publishing our friends' work, people we knew, for it to go like this is really good. And this issue we've had contributions from plenty of people in London, but also some Portuguese architects living in Tokyo who lived in this capsule tower, some of you may know. It's quite nice to get that. And some people in Shanghai, and some of whom we know, some we don't. So equally, we'd encourage all of you here, since we have your attention, to submit for the next issue. And we really would enjoy that, serious or otherwise. So I think now that's enough about Matzine, and Owen, I'd invite you to introduce everybody else. Thank you.
Hi, good evening and welcome. So tonight our panel will be discussing the nature and use of language in architecture and design, and the methods through which we convey ideals, ideas and instruction. We'll be asking if architecture should have an Orwellian approach to the purity of its language, or is there a problem like the critic Jonathan Meades dismisses as an ingrown verruca-like jargon that derives from the cretinous end of American academia? We'll be asking to jargon or not to jargon. I'm the chair this evening, Owen Pritchard, and I'm deputy editor of Icon magazine. Joining me on the panel, we have 4 invited speakers who will emphatically answer this question, so there's no discussion after.
Sorted out once and for all.
So we've split the panel into 2 parts. Pro-jargon on my right. We have Daisy Froud. Daisy is co-founder of the architecture practice AOC, Agents of Change, where she leads the firm's participatory arm. Having trained as a linguist, she now works as an interpreter of places and ideas and knowledges about places. Joining her is Indy, co-founder of 00, a London-based strategy and design practice with a foundation in delivering award-winning architecture and commissioned research into the built environment. They're driven by an aspiration to create genuinely sustainable places, founded on evidence, social and economic and environmental principles. And then against jargon, on my left, I have Crystal Benz, an art, architecture, design writer and curator. She's a contributing editor to an excellent magazine called Icon. she runs a blog called Development Aesthetics, co-edits pages of magazine with Cecilia Lingreen. Issue 1 is available next week. And she has a PhD in Latin literature, and when she's not doing all that, she likes to go sexy. Charles Holland is an architect and director of FAT. He's currently working on the practices design for a new house in the Essex countryside in collaboration with the artist Grace and Perry. Charles also teaches, writes and generally pontificates on architecture in various places, including his own entirely jargon-free blog, Fantastic Jargon.
Guaranteed, 100%.
Each of these guys are going to present their position and then we'll discuss what's been said before opening up to the floor and then deciding to jargon or not to jargon.
There will be a vote at the end.
And there will be a vote at the end.
Decisive outcome.
So kicking us off is Daisy.
Is there any chance just to get past the water because it's so hot? I'd hate to kind of peter out halfway through and run down a bit. I'm going to stand up because I feel it's appropriate. Are we all standing up?
Try not to touch it too much.
Everyone sit down, basically. No one would know who was speaking. So I'm going to use that as my drinks table.
Go for it.
Okay, so I'm speaking on behalf of jargon. I am for jargon if you take that to mean that I am for the inventive, critical, and at times strange or challenging use of the beautiful, evolving, fragile thing that language is. The best means that we have to debate and construct the world of both ideas and space around us. I'm against jargon if you mean lazy, thoughtless use of words, either under an assumption that the meaning is obvious or because you can't be asked to think of a better one for the given context. And in that respect, to me, jargon is the worst piece of jargon of all. Everyone thinks they know what jargon means. It's an insult we sling around, just as we might dismiss something as pretentious if we don't understand it. And yet, of course, it's not necessarily a pejorative term. It can simply be the shared language of people with a common interest. And most of us have a common interest in the way that the built environment around us is shaped. We all have to live in it, and in Europe, we all have rights to demand certain things from it. But common sense, one of my most hated phrases, as sense is something that always needs to be negotiated and never assumed, leads us to think that jargon is a useful word and jargon is a bad thing. What I would rather say, to paraphrase a famous right-wing queen of rhetoric, you know, there is no such thing as jargon. There are individual words and phrases, and there are contexts, and none of us can do anything except through language. I quote from the right because the government has just launched a new anti-jargon drive. While I agree with the principle of linguistic clarity, I find some of the guidance insidious, learning that civil servants will no longer commit or pledge because we're either doing something or we're not. This disturbs me, because politics are difficult, and you can't always do the thing you want to do immediately, but you can at least make clear that you're going to do everything you can to achieve it. John Pilger wrote recently about the way in which we now use the plain English fairness to describe the current political agenda. Sorry, agenda's a banned word now. Instead of the more challenging social justice. Social justice is not a simple concept, but it implies something that needs to be planned and considered, something to debate and to strive for, something a bit scary and powerful. So how does this relate to design? Well, because producing a public project, a school, a piece of public realm, whatever that means, a high street, is a political act. This is not to say that architects have power, but the activity we undertake is certainly a conduit for the power of others. And it's all too easy to pretend that we have no influence at all in the way that people understand their agency within the world that surrounds them. Focusing on language, while important, can become a distraction from the nature of the social and political acts that we're complicit in performing. When we present designs for discussion, we not only have the opportunity to show what we're doing or to argue for what we propose doing, the classic planning consultation scenario, we also have an opportunity to support non-professionals in thinking about the forces and factors, policy, regs, money, that inform a particular project, and about where there is room for them to shape or challenge that project, and to take that knowledge onto future projects, and to shape and challenge those in turn, especially if those designers and developers aren't quite so open to the idea. Equally importantly, we have the opportunity to learn from non-professionals and to make new meaning with them in order to get a better project and better words and phrases to describe that project and future projects. I will never shy from using the existing terms, the professional jargon. Almost tempted to say the labour's not for turning there, but I thought it might be taking it too far. But the way I discuss design with others, I may disapprove with some of that jargon. I'll always take care to define it carefully. But words like stakeholder, regeneration, density, value, massing, scale, these are out in the world and they are shaping decision making. It can be useful for a non-professional to be able to recognise and use that language in turn. Now, I've battled with PR people over this, but I see them from the same school as government wonks, using plain English to simplify and even mask the debate, to stop people saying, hang on, what does that actually mean? Because apparently the meaning is self-evident. But language is never innocent. Meaning is always slippery. As semiotician Mikhail Bakhtin states, neutral dictionary meanings of words of a language ensure their common features and guarantee that all speakers of a given language will understand one another. But the use of words in the live speech communication is always individual and contextual in nature. The Plain English lobby claims support from Orwell's famous call for clarity and simplicity in political language. But we are not in 1940 now. Today's politicians have got this idea. Simple language is the norm, with apparently neutral words bandied around as if we all knew exactly what they mean, while the actual activity in architecture and politics takes place in complex and hidden ways. I once trained an East London group in how to critique design proposals so they could influence major development through a review panel in their area. And halfway through session one of them turned to me and said, "What is this space you keep on going on about? I don't get it. To me, space is the black stuff in the sky with stars in it." A reminder that any word can be jargon in the right or the wrong context. So yes, use jargon, use slang, use poetry, prose, street, use it all. But if you're going to work on public projects, with all their messy, wonderful relationships, then above all, think carefully about what it is that you're doing in the first place, its social and political implications, and how, when the constraints, whether these are planning policy or the increasingly pervasive commercial confidentiality, how you can support a critical, collaborative conversation. There is no such thing as jargon, just the right and wrong words for a political context. And in that way, I am pro-jargon, in the way that I'm pro any language that you choose to use.
Do we need any more discussion now?
No, I think we go home. That's it. Daisy killed it. Seriously, I think Daisy going to stand for president of the RIBA. We like straightforward voting.
Okay, so Crystal,
We're done, right?
would you like to take the floor?
Okay, I think I might stay sitting down. The funny thing is that I don't disagree with quite a bit of what Daisy said, actually. But I do disagree with a lot of what she said about jargon, about language, particularly the use of language in architecture. Okay, so I'm not going to get sidetracked. I'm going to stay to my thing. And this is a case against jargon part 1. And I think Daisy talked quite a bit about whether you can define or not define and what the role of defining a term is. And I think somebody's got to just come out and do the kind of boring bit of defining what jargon is. And it's actually quite interesting because there are 2 definitions. One is confused, unintelligible language, which is the kind of pejorative sense of jargon, and the other is, as Daisy mentioned, the kind of technical terminology used by a specific set of groups. And I don't know if you can really separate those things, but I'm going to try a little bit. And I
Can you stand up, please? Or project?
Fine. Okay. Okay. So I realised as I was putting together my thoughts for this debate that it's not necessarily that I'm anti-jargon, although I am anti-jargon, that would become obvious. But even more than that, I'm anti-bullshit. And this is something that I come across quite a lot. And also, my experience is markedly different from the other 3 people on the panel because I'm not a trained architect and I don't work for an architecture practice. So I come at this from the journalist, the writing, and the curatorial side of things. So my experiences will be slightly different and probably more, they've definitely left a mark anyway. So in the world of architectural jargon, bullshit is called, there are many words for it, archibolics, archispeak, and the Urban Dictionary has a beautiful definition of archispeak, which I'm going to read because it made me laugh. So it defines archispeak as large made-up words that architects and designers use to make themselves sound smarter than you being the client or the confused observer of design. It does nothing to inform or enlighten the user or beneficiary of architecture, and mostly serves to numb them into obedience or self-doubt. Yeah, it's funny, right? So, just a quick straw poll. How many people in this room are trained architects or work in an architecture practice? Put your hands up freaking high. Okay, yeah, great. Most people in this room. Okay, so I'm probably not going to win myself many fans or do myself any favors by saying that I love architects. I do love architects, but Jesus Christ, you are like the kings and queens of bullshit. So much so that it's like the nearest thing I could kind of, one argument that people always say to me that architects always say to me when I have this kind of conversation with them is like, yeah, but architecture is like a super specialized discipline, it's like medicine or it's like science, and we have this jargon and we have this specialized language to communicate. This is what architects say to me. And we have this language, and whatever. And I always say, yeah, okay, that's kind of horseshit, because an architect saying praxis or fenestration is not even close to the same thing as like a doctor saying aorta. It's just completely different, and I'm going to try and not go totally off my thing, and I guess we don't really expect kind of scientists and doctors to sort of dumb down, but they're not adding complexity for the sake of adding complexity. That's just what the thing is called. Whereas praxis is just like, it has this whole history of theory, and we can get into that conversation if you want to, but for the sake of this argument, and also because it amuses me, it's just sort of bullshit. There are a million other things you can say besides praxis. I'm not going to go on words too much, because I know there's a list of words coming. Okay. Oh, yeah, also, this is another really unpopular thing that's going to happen, but particularly, this has come from my experience working as a curator of architects, and I love architecture, I love cities, I love towns, I love villages, I love urban design, I really love all of that, and I think architects, strangely, they feel really insecure. I'm massively generalizing, apologies. There's this huge kind of insecurity, and I don't know where it comes from. I think it partly comes from feeling really vilified by the public at large and maybe not feeling loved enough. And that, combined with an educational system that turns these wonderful, interesting, smart, sensitive, politically committed people into, I'm sorry to say, but kind of dickheads. I think it's the gap between those two things that makes people resort to this like overwhelming use of jargon, particularly when communicating to the public. I love this. This is kind of another thing I think is a sort of widespread misconception amongst intelligent people and many more less intelligent people, that indecipherability is like a mark of superior intelligence. And this is something I come into contact with a lot in academia as well, but I think it's this perverse thing that architects have, that like being clear and using simple, plain language to express complicated ideas is just like a thing that people don't do. And I was trying to think of some really good examples within architecture and also outside of architecture. And because using plain language, I think this is something that Daisy kind of mentioned, like, it's this like smeared upon this idea that it's dumbing things down, or which I think is nonsense. I think, you know, if you can explain an idea using clear and precise language, it doesn't have to, and simple language, it doesn't therefore mean that the ideas must be simple, or that you can't use style to express these ideas. And I was trying to think of people within architecture, and I thought of someone like Jane Jacobs, who I think writes really beautifully and really engagingly on cities. Whether you agree with her or not, I think the quality of her writing is a really good example of how you can write simply and clearly and still express kind of complicated ideas. And obviously within theoretical physics, you have Richard Feynman, who is like just such an amazing example of how you can take incredibly complex, you know, he did the double slit experiment and he made it so simple and he used really clean language. You don't have to use jargon, complicated language, bullshit to express interesting ideas, difficult ideas. Getting sidetracked. Oh yeah, okay, so the bad jargon. Partly my hatred of jargon / bullshit / architectural speak comes from working at the Architects Journal and then at Icon and the curation. I've curated something for the Venice Biennale last year, which was one of the most traumatic experiences of my entire life. I'm not even joking. And the thing is a lot of architects also say, you know, it's not my job to communicate in words. Our language isn't words, our language is drawings, which is fine. I kind of get that, but you still have to express your ideas to the public. If you aren't a good writer, hire a good writer. Some bad ones. I just wanted to read a couple of my favorite. I have a collection of these because I'm perverse, hidden in a folder on my computer. I'll read two. This is descriptions that are from, they're actually just, so they're on, I'm kind of avoiding the whole public realm stuff because that's not where so much of my experience lies. It's in sort of dealing with architects trying to promote their own work to try and then get us to promote it through a magazine or through an exhibition or whatever. So this is actually from their websites or from press releases that they've sent us. And the first one is, I'm not going to tell you who either of them are. The first one says, when we remember, and also as we see meanings and nuances slip back and forth from the actual to the suggestive, new art can have an archaic quality, and a new building can appear older than the one it replaces. Our loss of an intellectual center and its architectural analog in the hearth or temple throws us outwards to the natural world, and when we fall back upon our own resources and the company of friends, blah, 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 you get the idea.
We'll run that.
I'm not going to say. Okay, and then the next one, this is actually genuine. This one is, that was about a house, a private house. This is another one about a private house, which is like just one of the best things I've ever come across. It's called the Centrifugal Villa. The centrifugal villa is arranged around a hollow center, as if the heart of the house had somehow fallen outside its body. A string of subsequent spaces in its interior provide a comprehension of the whole by sacrificing their individual geometric cohesiveness to the fractured configuration of the entire composition. The experience of the interior is characterized by constantly shifting vanishing points at the place of their collision in each crease of the plan, large openings, cutting, dormer, scoops. Yeah, this is like, even my printer gave up at this point. Blah, blah, whatever, you get the idea. Which is ridiculous. I've got loads more if you want to see more, whatever. Yeah, okay, the drawings and the language, fine, hire a writer, get someone on your project team who actually knows how to write, whatever. I run a blog called Development Aesthetics, which is basically pictures of hoardings from development sites all over the country. And I did it mostly so I could channel my rage into something constructive, because every time I walk past these things, I just got so pissed off. And I know architects aren't responsible for that language, but I kind of think that if you take the care at the beginning of the process, because bad language is used in competitions, it's used in consultations, it's used in various documents, it's the whole way through you get this complete nonsense. And I think maybe if architects can help be part at the beginning of not using that kind of language, not talking about the centrifugal connection between nature and the oscillation of the whatever. I think maybe it will then filter down into all stages of the process. I don't know, that's my great hope for humanity. So, since I've just been saying why I think architectural bullshit is horrible, I thought I would be positive at the end and give a couple of examples of, if not like good jargon, at least maybe things that architects could do to kind of communicate their ideas through words and not words. So a couple of people, a couple of projects that sprung to mind when I was thinking of this is Studio We've had this little, it's a couple of years old. It's in the Kielder Forest Park. It's the cabins, Freya and Robin's hut, and it's, I'm just going to say, it's not the most beautiful piece of writing, this story. The whole thing is like this kind of, it's this lovely narrative about these two cabins and why they're there and what they're doing there. But I think it's so refreshingly different, and it's kind of an interesting way to try and communicate with people who aren't architects, because often architects seem to only be interested in communicating with each other, not so much with the general public. So I think that's one. It's this kind of idea of telling a story, which is really nice. Obviously, I've got Charles sitting here, so I'm not going to say what an amazing writer he is too much. But I think Fat is a brilliant example, because they're all amazing writers as well, and they do a lot of writing. I mean, Sam and Charles are the ones who I know their writing's the best. And writing for a kind of in a public forum and having an editor, writing somewhere that requires, I don't know, talking nonsense. So I think they're good examples. I'm sure everyone's read their blogs or read their pieces. And I think that must help, writing in a public forum must help you be able to better communicate your ideas. And the last person is David Cullen. I think he's just a fantastic writer, and I think he's another really good example of an architect who, he's not like a mind-blowing writer, but he writes really clearly, really simply, and I think another part of that is I know he does a lot of writing, he writes a lot of essays, and I don't know, a lot of books and introductions and stuff. And I was just, in preparation for this, I was reading through quite a lot of his old work. So I know that not all architects are fantastic writers, and why should you be? And I know that a lot of bad architects may be good writers. I don't know if that analogy works. But I just would I'd love to see less jargon and less bullshit. I don't think it means you have to simplify your ideas. Just simplify the expression of your ideas.
And over to Indy. Firstly, I want to suggest Daisy goes for president. Really good. I think we'd be in a much better place, so that would be really good. Depends what you think, right? I use words as a method to think, not as a method to communicate. And in a way, I think this whole thing about jargon is also becoming a method to control ideas. So yes, my writing, my My tweets are complicated. So what? I don't care. I still have 6,400 people that fancy reading them, fancy think they're interesting. But the point is, I don't really care about actually this idea of I'm trying to communicate. No, I'm trying to solve a political problem or an idea that needs solving. Actually, the communication actually happens through empathy. Communication actually happens through shared purpose. Communication doesn't happen through words. Communication happens because you look someone in the eye and you give a shit about their life. And I think we get hung on stuff which is about words because actually it's the medium that's the problem. It's the fact that the medium that we're using is journalists. We don't need them. What we need is actually people authentically communicating what they're doing to the daily world. You can. Medium exists. Look at medium.com, fantastic writing platform. Look at Twitter. Suddenly you can create and bypass these intermediaries and create authentic relationships with people. And they will correct you, they will argue with you, they will disagree with you. But the fact is your emotion, your passion, your disagreement will come through. Words are not just about communication, they are actually a thinking structure. They're about how certainly for me they are, for some people it's drawings, and I totally respect that, right? Some people do fantastic, amazing drawings that don't necessarily communicate. I don't care, that's how they think. That's amazing and beautiful. And actually like people used to say to me, like, you know, I used to do consultations and stand in front of them. People say, oh God, sure, that would be pretty weird. No, it's not, because actually it's pretty straightforward. If you talk about your life experiences, where you actually come from, and you create genuine relationships of where you've come from, why you're doing what you're doing, people listen. And I think we're being caught into a false sense of kind of, hey, let's normalize. No, let's be evocative, let's create new words, let's create new languages. I sit in a world where I cross between social investment right now. We built a £4 million fund. Why? Because we weren't scared of languages. I don't care about whether it's sort of enterprise language or social investment language or whether it's design language. These are just things to play with, ideas to play with. And you can easily move between them. And for me, I have to say, the architects that wrote their description of the house, I actually found it poetic. Call me old-fashioned. I actually found they were trying to think of something in their own world. And I have complete empathy for them. I have complete empathy for somebody thinking their own idea of how they want, what their way of thinking was. I have complete empathy for it. Because actually we have hundreds of them. I've heard Barack Obama talk about his views in the world. They're shit. Half of them are crap. Because he's allowed the NSA to fucking read all our emails. He's allowed that to happen. Yet he's a good writer. Who cares? Has he been authentic? No. So I think the issue for me is authenticness. Jargon is actually all about context and perspective. What may look like jargon to you, but may be completely authentic to the person writing it. And it may be authentic to one person who's reading it and listening it. It isn't about everyone. It's about everyone in particular. And everyone is particular, every context is unique. For me, that's why we shouldn't become this bland, modernist perspective on language, which is about kill it. Bring it down to a Daily Mail standard. It's not. You know, people who wrote institutional economics, people who talked about the woman that wrote institutional economics, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, it's very difficult to read. So what? She still really rethought how the economics of cities worked. It's fantastic that it was. So, in a way, for me, it may look like jargon to many of us, but actually it was a fantastic expression of an idea. And actually it's appreciated by huge numbers of people. It may not be the person in the street, but it doesn't matter. It will still make the world a better place. Let's not get obsessed by jargon or not jargon. Jargon is just, for me, language is just a tool to think and actually communicate. Communicate, and empathy is your biggest tool. Everything else is pretty localized. It's just ideas, we're playing with ideas. So, to put that forward, for me, I think this whole thing about, I don't want to live in a Daily Mail world of kind of obsessed with the normality of language and bringing it down to the fact that somebody randomly off the street should be able to walk in and if I started speaking in Hindi, would they randomly off the street be able to understand with me? No, they wouldn't. It's okay. Because I give a shit about them. I empathize with people. That's what matters. Let's not get obsessed by the tools and the devices. It's about you as authentic people that matters. Jargon, that's the method to control us. screen.
And our final speaker is Charles.
Yeah, blimey. That's a bit of Iron Jargon. So I think the scores are 30-15. Okay. I don't disagree with many of the things we said actually, but maybe that bit of reasonable debate can wait until after this. I just prepared a handy guide, which is 15 steps to a jargon-free life. Which is a list of words I've now banned. None of you can use them again. Words that I often use myself, but I've been weaning myself off them and I'm getting better slowly. Okay. 1. Space. As in, this is a really contemporary space. Which translates as, I quite like this room. 2. Map / mapping. As in, I've been mapping the space, which translates as, I've drawn a plan of the room. 3. Program, especially when prefixed by cross. As in, I'm really into cross-program space. This vertical trout farm on Mars, nods to Alistair Parvin, is still a bit boring. Maybe it needs an experimental theatre attached to it. 4. Interrogate, as in, I think you really need to interrogate this building and section. Which translates as, I can't think of anything else to say in this crypt. 5. Yeah, one student. 5. Problematise, as in, this upside down staircase really problematises the concept of vertical circulation. 6. Challenge, as in, this upside down staircase really challenges preconceived notions of up and down. 7 is calibrate, as in, the threshold is carefully calibrated to express a sense of transition from public to private space. Translation, this is the front door. 8. Boundary, as in, the junction dissolves the boundary between inside and outside. Translation, it's glass. 9. Blur, as in, this work blurs the disciplinary boundaries between art and architecture. That's actually one of mine. 10. Disciplinary, see above. 11. Practice, as in, writing is my form of spatial practice. 12. Praxis, there we go, see above but even worse. 13. Theorise, an example of this is, sorry I'm late, I've been busy theorising my praxis. Translation, I've been reading my Twitter stream. 14. Liminal, as in, my spatial practice is very concerned with mapping liminal space. Translation to that is, I live next to an industrial estate. And finally, 15, territory, territorialise, or even worse, deterritorialise, as in, this is my attempt at deterritorialising the ideological function of jargon through challenging preconceived notions of language with respect to spatial and theoretical praxis. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I mean, there seems to be some consensus between you all, and I'm sure this is just going to kick off, so I'm going to ask a quick question and let you off. So we've sort of ascertained that, Daisy, you noticed that jargon is used in architecturally and it's constantly evolving. In some ways it's dumbing down and being dilated. You touched on similar points as well. Architecture in itself is inherently complex, from the technical aspects of construction, the processes of commission and procurement, to understanding the cultural, symbolic and economic value of it. Is it not necessary that there's a level of sophistication when discussing its conception, realisation, meaning and impact? And I'm going to put it to you guys if you're against jargon.
Well, I feel like, well, I sort of said most of what I have to say about that, which is that it's making the assumption that using language that is simple and clear is somehow dumbing down, or you're not able to express complex ideas through simple and clear language, that the meaning and the kind of evolution of simple and clear language isn't as, I don't know, that you have to use that you have to use complex language to express phonics.
I was just going to say, perhaps the debate is not about simple or complex. 'Cause I think that's that's perhaps leading us down the wrong path together. Because I don't think it is. Sometimes complexity is appropriate. Sometimes simple is appropriate. If you look at the way we've all spoken, we've kind of interwoven those things in order to communicate. For me, the kind of notion is jargon is purely about perspective and context to which people exist. Now, I thought all your quotes that were really interesting, and you picked this up about the language. But for me, philosophically, I think what we're all being silently attacking in the room is, as kind of I think rightly alluded, was the kind of art history language that has built and been attached to architecture for the last 30 years and has become a kind of pseudo concept holder for architecture. That's quite different to saying that is jargon. That's not. We're just attacking an idea that's been underpinning architecture for a few years. And
loads of architects use that language.
Sure, but let's a concept, right? Let's not worry about the language. There's something more profound going on.
Yeah, I do disagree with that. I mean, I think that the one thing I think on the pro-jargon side of the room, which I totally agree with, even though what I just said might suggest slightly the other way, is Daisy's point about common sense. And in that sense, I slightly depart away from the idea of a kind of plain speaking English in the sense that I don't really think that's possible. And I think it's also good that it isn't possible in some ways. I think common sense is a very worrying term. I share that idea that there is some sort of immutable kind of sense or practical kind of way to talk about stuff that everyone can understand as a sort of degree zero, because I think clearly these things are negotiated all the time. But I disagree with you, Indy, on the sense that they're attacking the concept, because I'm not attacking the concept of describing architecture in art and historical terms at all.
No, but
what I'm attacking, I suppose, is the slightly lazy appropriation of certain words that have passed from a point of being quite useful to a point where they just cover up more than they reveal. And I think my issue with jargon is precisely that its function is to kind of eliminate meaning in a way, or the possibilities of meaning, by replacing it with a set of things that we all kind of nod about but don't actually really quite know what anyone means. But that's right, it's kind of convenient.
But that's quite interesting, right? Because I agree with you about that, but in a way, maybe we should be talking about the interrogative capacity. We're not
interrogate's banned.
Yeah, interrogate's banned, sorry. But for me, we don't interrogate our positions and our thoughts. And that's probably more interesting to me than whether it's jargon or not. People are allowed to get away with laziness. I agree with that. A laziness of kind of thought. But I remember, when people sometimes used to use work, they were trying to do something. Delia Scafido did the whole blur, right? They were trying to do something rather amazing with blur. So in a way, the word is just it's the laziness of appropriation that we all agree, right, is the issue.
I think people feel like they need to talk that way though as well. I feel like there's this kind of style, there are these words, and you're not going to be accepted into a kind of tribe unless you use this, you just tick off English.
It's out of fear and insecurity that happens. And I kind of take issue, obviously I'm not even an architect, but riding slightly over that architects do these things, because I think there are all kinds of things that people do, and sometimes architects do it in positions of insecurity, or as Indy was saying, I think it's slightly perhaps unfair to take the architectural, we are talking about public projects tonight, and to take statements that perhaps weren't made for public consumption but were made for co-professional consumption and use them, because it is contextual. But I think the thing is,
between consenting architects.
You can't even do it there. There's no way in hell.
It's not. I can't even do it there. It's that. So language.
You choose to do it there.
Yeah, but language. You use language in appropriate contexts. And what I find really interesting is the critique that often co-professionals give about certain pieces of jargon that are used in public projects, which actually the people that we are then working and designing the buildings for are not only perfectly happy to use, but rather, I was telling, I think, Jay and Maria about this, from Studio Weave about this a few months ago, that we're working on a community centre at the moment. Everybody working on that community centre agrees, architects and people who are going to run the centre, we don't want it to be called a community centre, because even though that's the plain English term for it, there's so many associations bound up with those words that nobody in that area is ever going to want to set foot in a community centre. And people started saying, and obviously this is a term that Indy's made much use of, I know, couldn't it be a hub? It's like the heart of a wheel, and everything in the community is coming together in the heart of the wheel. And we were all sitting there going, the architects, like, that's a nice idea, but maybe that's not quite the appropriate thing, because obviously we are aware now that in our world hub is seen as an item of jargon, but then afterwards I felt really terrible for trying to edge them away from it, because in their world it wasn't an item of jargon. In that context it was a word that they felt could really help them communicate to other people who lived around them what this building was going to be for them, and that is the contextual discussion. That hub would be a cliche, sorry, it's a sign of its success.
No, but
In this room, but it wouldn't be a cliche in others.
But it's interesting, like I agree with you again about how Studio We wove a very powerful narrative and evoked this new form of meaning and evoked that in a way where they kind of, I totally agree. I would never use it again, but Studio We were able to create a narrative which would evoke a new sense of purpose and meaning and allow people to be able to transmit their story. The transmittability of that story, which is part evocative, part complex, part rich, can be introduced in lots of different ways. And the hub was just an evocation method. There was a way for it to become viral and spread through people. Well, that's my interpretation.
Yeah, it's a metaphor. Yeah.
I just have a feeling that we're not really talking about jargon or not jargon, but we're actually talking about bullshit or not bullshit.
Yeah.
I mean, here that we have a typical example of very good architects who can't express themselves through words because they have to express themselves through words for certain situation, and they have to use jargon because they're insecure how they can express. And we have really terrible architects that who have a brilliant writers or however they want to express it, brilliant businessmen to sell their scheme in one way or another. I'm going to use exactly your methodology, where I come from, and trying to be authentic about it. I came to this country when I was 15, English is my second language, and whenever I read anything, I think twice. Does this what actually this person means? Because I might be misunderstanding. That kind of gives me a totally different sense of understanding, because I don't read their words and how they structure their language, but I'm just trying to understand what they're trying to say. So it doesn't really matter however they format their words and sentence structure, as long as I understand what one another.
Are they separated?
Well,
Is that a word?
Jargon.
Well, no, the idea that there's a sort of authentic meaning which can be communicated, I'm slightly suspicious of that.
Surely
There's
the
an
response
authentic
is
meaning
primal.
which everyone's sort of like obscuring by language. And they go like, well, first of all, without language, the thing don't mean, right? So you have to use language. Secondly, then, as Daisy quite rightly pointed out, it's entirely negotiable. So the idea that one is more authentic than the other, I find very spurious. One person's authenticity is another person's sort of made up language of their own, isn't it? So which comes down to the fact that what we're talking about here are differences in people's understanding of what is implied by those terms and the familiarity of the terms being used. So for instance, you could walk into one community and say, I've got an idea for a hub for you, and they would look at you like you're a lunatic. And equally, community centre is jargon. It just happens to be one that's slightly out of favour in the way that library was was out of favour for a while, and library was out of favour, replaced by ideas store, for instance, right? Yeah. So now ideas stores are slightly out of favour, and libraries are not that because they're all closing. But nonetheless, what we're saying is that these things are kind of fragile and constantly moving around. So I would resist the idea that there's a kind of authentic way to communicate.
Only because he mentioned that the words come from things like that. Only thing I was saying is that kind of gives me the step back. I don't read the words. I actually use the dictionary quite a lot.
You take a critical perspective on the language, which some of us forget to do when you think you know what the language means. You step back.
It's because I'm sure it.
No, but that's good. This is a good thing, Joe. That's what we should all be doing.
Yeah, it doesn't quite make sense for me. It's like coming from the South Korean background where the one single word means actually a single thing. You can actually just and English is brilliant, and there's no other country, other language like that. It's like you guys still run as case laws. What the fuck is about that? Anyway, so it's like everything is about specific context at specific time. Your language changes constantly, and as you're saying, I completely agree with you. It's just simply a tool. And when you say plan, for some people is your life plan on how you're going to do it, and for us it means drawn in the different line weights in the paper space somewhere in MicroStation or AutoCAD and that kind of stuff. So it's
for me. I mean, the heart of the issue is about kind of creating the democracy for people to be able to use and make language as they feel appropriate. It is their loss or their gain if they choose to communicate with 4 million people, or if they choose to communicate poetically with 3. And I don't think we should create an environment which allows for the tyranny of a perspective, single perspective, of this is jargon or this is not jargon, to actually control what is probably the most evocative tool we have to create ideas. And I think that, to me, it's about the democracy of how we think. And it's fundamentally, I think that's, so I'm pluralistic about it.
But it's really problematic because not as many people, in fact, not very many people are as kind of thoughtful as that. And I don't think you often get these, it's just this kind of default, it's just this default use of language in a very particular way, which is jargon to the extreme, where it then turns into bullshit.
Can I pick both of these? Because if we're talking about public projects, which was the theme for tonight,
Sure.
I think that you don't necessarily have the choice of I'm going to communicate to 4 or 4 million. That you do have an obligation to communicate a project to the people who are going to be influenced by that project, stakeholders, to use that bit of jargon, because actually it saves. Everyone here knows what a stakeholder is, right? So I can save a couple of sentences. I can save a couple of sentences. But so we do have an obligation to communicate well. But I do take I do take issue with this idea that actually most people are critical. I actually find that given the opportunity, most people are critical. And time again, I'm encouraged by PR people to run public consultations in a way that treats people like small children and to ask them what they want and to present things in very facile language, and obviously they respond in facile ways, like animals locked up in a zoo. And the minute we present things in more interesting, complicated ways, people step up and they engage with it.
I meant architects.
I know you meant architects, but what I'm talking about is the way that we are architects.
Well, you are.
So you're saying that most people apart from architects are critical? Sorry,
No,
I'm saying most people aren't that critical.
I thought you meant like you kind of dumb down the use of, or within the kind of the stakeholder world of public projects. This is about sort of architects and local authorities dumbing down language.
They do.
Treating people like
They do a lot of the time. But the thing I was simply taking issue with was your statement when you said most people don't ask. It's okay if you do ask questions in that way, but most people don't. And I'm simply saying, in my experience, given the opportunity to engage in a critical conversation, actually most people do.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
But on which side of the?
Well, on both sides, because I don't try and separate people into sides, to be honest, Crystal. I think we are.
There are sides.
There are totally. There are sides if you insist on it. But I would. Okay.
There are sides. You cannot get away from the fact that somebody is designing, somebody is building, somebody is putting the money in.
Okay, and that's the problem in seeing it as sides. I think that's the thing, because sides, again, is a language that evokes the idea of British Bulldog or something, where we're facing each other and we're about to collide.
It's like that. It's so political.
It can. No, but politics is not about that either. Politics is about positive conflict and negotiation.
Not in my world.
Okay, well, come and join some of our events sometime.
But why do you want to separate people's intellectuality through use of the language? I mean, some people just don't know certain language. It took me, I think it was when I was like diploma, I understood what mullion means.
Yeah, but this is that argument I was talking about.
I didn't know the word. So what?
But I think if you don't have to use, if the technical specialized language, if there are alternatives to that, if it's a situation in which there only is that language, that's the only thing that you can speak.
But you can contextualise that technical language, and I agree with the point that there is a technical language, and therefore what you have to do then maybe is explain that and place it in the context of other languages. I mean, I think the consultation thing's interesting because my feeling is that there's certain kinds of jargon which aren't also just about words, but about certain kind of modes of activity. And I remember when the only bit of really intense consultation I've been involved in was when we designed some houses. I remember the residents had been. A previous architect or master planning architect had asked them to do something and said, okay, when you go home and find an object that you love in your house and bring it back, and they all came back with nothing because it was such an alien concept to be asked that. You know, that it sounds really like a first year architecture project. And so in architecture school you go, I know what you mean by that, I think of an interesting way to answer that. But they were like, what? Why did it? Our first question was like, you know, would you like the kitchen to go here or there? And they were a bit more, suddenly became a bit more animated. So it's not so much that jargon as a language, it's a sort of way of approaching the problem, which is to sort of bring, I suppose, a whole set of like ideas about how you behave and what's appropriate into a setting where people don't really understand that set of things and are not immediately able to go, I know exactly what you mean.
I think, from this discussion, I kind of, the my impression about the debate about... I feel like there's certain allusion to the idea of culture. It seems that we're kind of culturally predetermined, or kind of, to talk about jargon, that you're kind of assuming there's kind of a culture being created around this jargon. And I think what's kind of interests me about it's not excluding this idea of jargon, whether it's good or bad. Sort of culturally speaking, is it productive to kind of produce new cultures, like you say, inventing new languages? And language is constantly evolving, it's an evolving culture. Or that culture somehow setting up some kind of boundaries that excludes other cultures. And for me, I think that's kind of how, I don't know, how that's...
But isn't this where you do the language creation, how open your language is? So I think that open your conversation is perhaps a more kind of interesting way of how, in a way I'm creating ideas, but I use Twitter as a method to constantly talk about whatever kind of bullshit is going through in my head. But in a sense, it's a method to keep the thought open. Why am I writing? Because I actually want to keep the thought open. So maybe there's something more potent about what is open conversation, what is open thinking, rather than jargon or no jargon. In a way, is there a new medium we require? If you look at like most of the tech developments going on in blogs, what I find interesting is they're trying to make the conversation richer. They're trying to create the architecture of conversation much more fluid and much more dynamic. Maybe what we need is a new architecture of openness in how we communicate, as opposed to the idea of jargon or no jargon, because the complexity of the language, maybe there's a different way to solve the problem. We could then all unite.
Open up to the floor, everybody's been jumping in anyway.
Can I ask a question about that folder on your computer?
Yeah.
If you were to take all of the press releases out of that folder and replace or just only have the photographs that the architects sent you, would there be any other common themes in that body of work?
Well, probably, but I feel like I've already sort of staked myself enough.
Do whisperers write like whisperers?
No, that's a good point. I mean, it's not like, bullshitters are kind of bullshitters, but it tends, does anybody know it's not going anymore, but the Bad British Architecture blog?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's that kind of stuff.
But the language that's going into
a lot of the
inbox is marketing speak. It's something provided. They're trying to sell you an idea. They're trying to sell you something which in turn
so that's
you
why I
deliver service
specifically took examples directly from the architects' practices, from their offices. I mean, because the PR thing is something else altogether.
It is unlikely that the architect wrote it.
Yeah, which is also
in
true.
that case.
But I think that's, in my experience, kind of from the working in magazines, most of the writing that came from a practice came from the architect that I knew about.
Is it trying to quantify the primal response that they want you to have to the space they provide in lots of ways? They're trying to sell something, an idea, and promote it. They're selling the idea of their ethos, their practice, their ideology, and it's been dressed up in such a way that maybe it comes across as self-indulgent.
Sort of. I mean, I know it's incredibly complicated, particularly when it's something that you really care about, and when you've put a lot of work into it, that's another debate altogether from my point of view. But I know how difficult it is to communicate those in a way that isn't like, oh my god, I've done this thing and it's amazing, which is often what it comes across as that, but in horrible language. I don't know. I don't know if there is a kind of common.
I suppose I was asking because I felt as though the examples that you gave wasn't. I feel like jargon is to do with a very kind of superficial kind of language level of that, and actually most of the things that you said they go much deeper. Architects probably really thought like that, and that is actually probably quite an accurate description of how they thought. And whether or not that's interesting to other people is kind of another conversation.
It feels completely meaningless to me when I get something like that, and I'm reading that as a paragraph. I feel like, what? Honestly, like what? This is like completely.
But that doesn't mean that it's not completely real.
Daisy jumping?
I mean, yes, maybe it is, but what?
I'm just letting you finish, but I was doing the chair.
You were poking
chair.
in.
I want to.
It just winds me up. That's the other thing. I find
Something will make him chair. I don't know.
I find it counterproductive because I get so wound up by it that I don't know if I can then see past that use of language to what maybe to try and then get into what I feel like they really mean. Or if I think the building is fantastic, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, and I will then look into it more, and I will go and look through all the things. I might even call them up.
I was just going to say, I mean, this is back against like audience specificity. In that, so I find it personally really useful. I mean, the thing I love about the way that Dezeen simply reproduces people's press releases is that I do get the purity of what the architects had to say, and that because I am that appropriate audience, I'm interested in design, then I love the act of interrogation that you perform on that, because you are doing that Sude's Corner quizzing. You're trying to work out, well, what are they actually doing, and the pictures I'm looking at, does that match up with the words? And having to perform the act of interrogation makes you engage more with the thing. And this, I mean, I mentioned this in the article, and this is where I'm moving into kind of troubling territory, because I worry all the time about the words I'm using. I don't think I've cracked it at all, but I think the important thing is to worry about the words you're using. That's all I'm saying. Is I kind of really like the way regeneration is such a shit word, and is so laden with all these connotations of religion and rebirth, because at least it's the kind of word that people will say, what does that mean? And be a bit suspicious of, and it allows you to feel, well, this is a troubling area, rather than using simple words like, which often are used, improvements or simply development, as if these are facts that happen and you can't challenge. So there's something actually about the inappropriateness or the metaphorical nature of some words that is actually really useful if you could just open up that little bit of critical gap to allow people to start questioning it.
So you think people don't do that with words like improvements as opposed to...
I don't think we do it as much. I mean, I can talk for myself, but I don't think I do it as much. I think there's certain words that do make you go, what the fuck's that? And I certainly think that people, when you are presenting things to people, you have a real responsibility in writing something, and there is sometimes I feel that I could slip things past people if I used a certain language, and sometimes if I'm writing a design and access statement or a planning application, I might do that. I'm not attempt to do that. I might do that. But in terms of a good
either confirm or deny.
In terms of a good broader public conversation between all of us, I think sometimes I'm grateful that the words, what I'm saying is I'm grateful that the words are so problematic, or the writing's so problematic, because I think it lays clues that maybe something's unresolved or troubling here that we all need to question.
Go at the back.
Hi there. Indy, I liked what you said about how jargon is not about everyone, but it's about everyone in particular. At least maybe you didn't say about jargon, but understanding the meaning, everyone can understand that. But I have a problem. I think you can't say that and still have a belief in democracy. I think you can't say that it's about everyone in particular, and
shall I resolve it for you?
No. Hold it back. Well, the problem is exclusivity. If I come along this evening and I want to come and I want to listen to some interested people speak because I saw their name on their email, and I've travelled in here, I've paid for the travel line here. I was going to write an email to the sister bid and I came out here, and actually I didn't understand half of what you guys said, because your language was a bit verbose, it was unattractive in some respects, and I just feel like I've been left out, and I actually don't know what my question was going to be. I couldn't ask a pertinent question because I felt excluded, and I think I am kind of important whenever I come along and be part of a bigger group. In some ways you've excluded me, and I think that's just like being rich and poor in a way. It's a bit about intellectualism and non-intellectualism. So how do you resolve that?
I'm constantly excluded. It's the way the world works. I mean, I tell you, okay, I find it, I know where you're going, and the problem I have with that debate is you're obviously right. But that doesn't make it, you're obviously right in the sense that's how you feel. There's nothing I can do to change that. The only thing that actually can be done is actually, like I was saying, I think that democracy is not created by the simplicity of language. Democracy is created by the openness of the discourse. And that's how we create democracy. The fact that you were able to stand up there and ask a question, and I stood up there and tried to say, actually, I hear you, you're right. Sometimes, many times I feel the same thing. I don't understand why somebody's saying what they're saying. But actually the ability to have this open conversation hopefully creates a bridge for us to actually further that debate. That is what creates democracy for me, and that's why openness is more relevant than jargon.
But democracy is all about learning other people's language.
Yeah, exactly.
I was sitting in this neurological society lecture about neuroscience, and I was, you listen to what the doctor says, and most of the words just go past me, and then they put up the drawings, beautiful drawings. I'm like, oh, that's nice, because that's how I speak. So, you're free to learn neuroscience, you're free to learn architecture. I think that was the most brilliant part about me coming to here.
Yeah, and the beauty is the world, in a way, the framework for creating those open conversations has been really radically opened up. Like whether it's stuff like social media, whether even how we all talk to each other. Like I've met so many amazing people on Twitter that I would never in my life crossed over with. I'm just using Twitter as an example. So actually the openness of the system and how it's creating, I think that's what's creating a richer side of democracy. And that's what's allowing us to be able to learn neuroscience. I read crazy stuff from all over the world because I find it fascinating. But that leaves it open to me, and the knowledge is open enough rather than institutionally locked as it historically was. So in a way that's richer.
Lady in the front.
Just, going back to everything that you've said, it's really interesting the kind of debate that we've had, but it tends to come back to the sense of a lot of us hate the same words. We all hate the word consultation, engagement, and actually what we're really doing is talking to people. And whenever we do that, we just say, what do you think of this place? How can we make it better? We always paraphrase things into the language that we see fit to the person we're meeting. So we are always quite intuitive about how we speak to people. It's just, I see a great advantage in the kind of architectural training that I went through and like practices who don't know how to communicate. And the differences I saw between small practices and large ones is the bigger they got, the better they got bullshitting, because they would just employ someone to write stuff for them. And it doesn't really matter, it's just the way that they drive that industry into thinking that the way they terminology, the terminology they use has to be said in a certain way. And I find the whole debate almost so frustrating because it's very simple questions that we're always asking, it's just how we phrase it. And there doesn't need to be jargon, the word engagement shouldn't be used, the word consultation shouldn't be used, but it could be used if you have to say it to a certain type of audience that would understand what it is you're carrying out. Does it tick a certain box? But anyway.
Do you think that complexity comes from the many different roles an architect or people in your field have to fulfill, and there's a blending and a complexity that's derived from the many roles you have to take, the different types of engagement you have? You're shaking your head.
No, I don't think it's about complexity.
I think designers were panicked into getting, I've worked at other practices before, like a month, a while back, and they were panicked into thinking they had to get someone to write stuff for them. But that person had no understanding of the product, no relation to what it is they're talking about. So really, you're the best person about talking about your product. You've decided it, you understand the audience.
Well, that's where social media is changing architecture.
Exactly.
But just to go back to consultation, the one point I want to make about consultation is that when the word was first used, it potentially was a word that had huge power. Because I think at the moment when it was first used, it was about a world where people were not, the conversation was not open. The framework for thinking and shared idea of the public space, or even the shared idea of built environment, was not understood. So it was a powerful, evocative word when the word was used. So I hear the hit against the language, but I also want to respect the moment when that word was evoked, because it was actually evoked in a very powerful, purposeful way. It may be overused, it may be badly used, masks a lot of things, but it was there for a reason. And so I want to respect the words in a way, because what they evoked.
And jump over Charles, do you have a point?
No. Yes, it is. But it's kind of just in agreement with that particular point, I think, Indy, which is that I don't think it's ever inherently the words that are the problem. And they are at certain times useful as sort of levers to start talking about something. I guess the case against jargon, from my point of view, is when they become useless, or they no longer useful in order opening up a conversation, and they start to do the opposite, I guess. The thing I was going to say about bad British architecture is kind of a minor point in this, but it highlights the issue of context for me quite well, because the beautiful thing about bad British architecture is it's press releases sent to an editor of an architecture magazine going, this is so badly done, I'm going to have to publish this. And so and the fact that they got it wrong, that was really the problem, because that person was getting hundreds of press releases every day and going. So the moment that thing is sort of shifted into critical context, it just becomes a horror show. Because and the other thing I was going to say about that is going back to the point about how architects write. In a way, the thing that interests me is how they write differently in different places. So, that description of the house may be very different when you're writing it in the design and access statement. When I think everything should be shifted around. You should write your most pretentious stuff for when you do the design and access statement, and the really, really boring stuff for when you talk to
I was going to pick up on Gemma's point about the word consultation, because so I agree, I don't personally like the word consultation, and I inwardly cringe every time I use it, but there is no better in terms of clarity of communication. Picking up on Indy's point, this word is now in the lexicon, it's something that everybody uses. I know that if I want to be really clear what's going on in this community centre next Saturday, I'm a lot better off saying consultation about the park than trying to find some way of putting it, because some people will see that poster and not realise that I'm about to ask really important questions about what they'd like to see happen to this park. So it's an incomplete word, it's an unsatisfying word, but at least it is so there now that people know, and to the point that people come to these events and they will say to me, this isn't a consultation, you haven't listened to us, we don't want this to happen. And then I do sort of sink into my professional jargon world, because actually I refer to the Shelley Arnstein ladder of citizen participation from 1969, where consultation is actually really low down the ladder of citizen engagement. It basically means, I'll talk to you a bit and then I'll do what I want anyway. But nonetheless, I know that to them it means more than that. It does mean a public conversation where a decision will be taken, and so I find it a really useful word. And I went through a phase of trying to put things in a kind of cooler, less cliched way, and in the end I just think, no, use the word, people know what I mean by it, and put my effort and my time into making a really good consultation. That means we can have the good conversation once they turn up.
But the weighting of the word consultation carries so much power that, as we've seen in recent news within kind of politics and those schools that we've been arguing over who would get to actually run the secondary school, it all kind of went amiss because they used the word consultation, actually they didn't take into account the consultation gathered, and it's used too generally in kind of as camouflage to saying we're going to talk to you, but actually it doesn't matter what you decide. No, but that instance, what was a school that got 98% voted for a certain school to carry on running it, and actually the government chose the one that got 2%.
But it was only a consultation. That's one factor, public opinion. So I think great if it's an annoying word, then let's say so fuck consultation. Let's do citizen decision making or participatory democracy instead. Sorry.
I'm going to jump in. Can I ask the panel just for the very quick final thoughts, if they have any at all, and then we'll put it to the vote, and we'll return to the original sort of question, to jargon, not to jargon, and then we'll all go get some fresh air. You can abstain. So I'm just going to start.
None of you actually spoken for jargon or.
We'll do it now.
We'll do it now.
All right.
There's no one
Okay, I'm going to start with these guys.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that I'm against jargon, not because I'm against so-called difficult language, or complex ideas, or intellectualising, or art history speak, or any of those things. I'm actually quite pro all of those, actually. And I'm not really pro plain speaking either, I'm mostly pro ambiguous speaking. And I'm against jargon because I think it's deathly, and because it kind of is the opposite. Its ideological function is to close down opportunities, and that it masks a sort of dearth of ideas, I guess, and a dearth of debate, which I guess in that sense I agree with Indy. So my populist case for against jargon is not to be confused with a sort of argument for we should just call a spade a spade. I prefer to call it a digging implement, generally. But because it defeats the richness of the experience of the world, I guess.
Basically, I couldn't agree with that more. So I'm not.
Team pro-
Yeah,
team
yeah.
anti-jargon.
Hurrah. The only thing it's just more of a quick comment than anything, which is something I was thinking of as we were kind of talking this last bit, which is we've sort of been dancing around the distinction between using jargon in speaking and writing, but we haven't really elaborated on it. But we clearly don't have the time for that. But I think something that's emerged is that there is a clear divide between how we feel about jargon in writing and how we feel about it maybe perhaps in speaking. That's something for the pub. Anyway, screw jargon.
Okay. I am pro-jargon because I am pro all forms of language. I understand language as an evolving, beautiful, complex thing that sometimes is easy, sometimes is difficult, but it's something that we make together and that we will shape the world, that we are also shaping together. So I am pro-jargon as a form of language. I am pro-jargon in certain contexts. There are contexts that are appropriate for it, there are contexts that are inappropriate, but we are talking about jargon in general tonight. So sometimes it's appropriate to use a cliche, a neologism, a piece of professional language, or even to invent new words together that we feel can describe a project. So yay jargon, and go the pro-jargon team! Go Daisy!
Go Daisy for president!
For my ears!
The only case for jargon, but I think it's the most important case, is that actually that no one should be able to legislate language. There is no idea of anyone saying somebody else's jargon or not. In a way, the freedom to create language and the openness of it is perhaps a fundamental need for democracy. And I think if you allow for this tyranny of control and perceived idea that something is jargon or something, that's where we weaken ourselves. And for me, it has to be about the democracy and the openness of people being able to create new words, create new meanings. Yes, I also think actually how we do it is increasingly open because technology is making it more open. So for me, it is not about jargon is actually just a symbol. It's a symbol of our freedom to create new languages.
Okay, so this is it. Like I said at the start, we're going to solve this once and for all. So, can those who are with Charles and Crystal and are for jargon or would to jargon raise their hands? Sorry, against jargon. That's a claim. So, who are against jargon? Please raise your hand. Quite high.
Oh, right, yeah.
Let it work for yourselves.
Yeah, it's like yourself for president.
I didn't think you could.
And the ones who are for jargon?
Are you having sit on the fence?
The winners.